I'm just writing a book. That's all.
Hello, welcome to Monday Morning. I'm Katie Halper, and we watch the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so you don't have to. And here we are, Monday morning. So excited to be doing this with y'all.
Good Monday morning, everybody. How's it going? Thanks for being here. Please like the stream. If you're watching it, and if you're not watching it, please like it anyway, and then go on your merry way. But yeah, we appreciate you being here. So much to cover. Another really depressing week in the world. But we're here to watch how the corporate overlords covered it, and they did a really masterful job as always. So
yeah. So we're going to start. And we're starting, you guys probably missed it. I think we took last week. Was it last week we didn't do Meet the Press? And you guys were probably in withdrawal this whole week. But rest assured, we're coming back to open with Meet the Press. So let's take a look.
Sunday morning. Good Sunday morning. As we come on the air, Election Day is exactly 6 months away. And dominating the headlines, those campus protests over the war in Gaza. President Biden spoke out about them on Thursday after days of silence, aiming to strike a balance between defending free speech and denouncing violence.
We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent.
We just play one on TV.
The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country.
More than 2,000 people have been arrested or detained in the last 2 weeks on campuses across the country as the humanitarian situation in Gaza worsens into what World Food Program Executive Director Cindy McCain told me is now a full-blown famine in the north. Some top Democrats now stepping up their warnings of the potential political price.
Ooh, some top Democrats are stepping up their warnings of the potential political price.
Right.
Cindy McCain just said there's a full-blown famine in the north. That should be the entire show. Hey, we're facilitating a full-blown famine on top of all the other atrocities we're facilitating.
You think that's newsworthy, Aaron?
Yeah, I do. And by the way, also, from that little recap there, no mention at all of the pro-Israel hooligans who attacked people in places like UCLA, launching literal fireworks into a peaceful encampment at UCLA. Right. There's only clashes, violence, arrests, and Biden completely conflating peaceful protests with the counter-protesters who attack them. The only possible, like, if you want to say that breaking a window is violence, okay, then that's what happened at Columbia when after the peaceful encampment was going on for days and days and that had already been raided once by the police. Then finally you had a group that broke into Hamilton Hall and they broke a couple of windows to do that. Okay, so that's what you can chalk up to
the extent of the violence.
Exactly, on the pro-Palestine side. Right. Meanwhile, you had Zionist mobs attacking people, especially at UCLA, and we saw police, be brutal across the country, including at Columbia.
Yeah, if you want to keep score of this, and this is something we're going to see. I'm glad you brought this up, Aaron, because as you brought it up, I realized, I forgot none of these. I mean, I had prepared these when I was preparing for the show. I was like, okay, here's another example of them not showing the violence committed by Zionists. Here's another example of them not showing the violence committed by Zionists. But of course, we have to tell people about that violence because none of the clips show it. So as you mentioned, there was a lot of Zionist violence at UCLA. Just to go over some of it, fireworks, mice were let out at a protest. Someone fought at UCLA. Someone dove into a crowd. I don't remember if that was at UCLA. It was at one of the encampments. We have a guy yelling bitch ass N-word at people. We had at Ole Miss, Mississippi, we had a white guy impersonating a black woman at making monkey noises. We have people hoping that other people get raped. We have one person saying death to Jews, but that person is a pro-Israel person. Very important for when people bring that example up. And we have, as you mentioned, brutal police brutality, ranging from obviously what they're doing to students, but then you had this famous clip at Emory University of a professor getting thrown to the ground brutally. You have Jill Stein, who we interviewed on this week, being like crushed with a bicycle, them grabbing her leg and then charging her. And there's also very disturbing footage of a professor, Professor Tamari, at the same university that Jill Stein was at, and he has broken ribs and has to have his hand operated on, I believe, but definitely broken ribs. And a doctor said he's lucky to be alive because they were kneeling on him and they could have punctured a lung and he would have died right there. Okay, so that's all the stuff you won't hear on the morning Sunday morning talk shows.
One more thing too. At UCLA, the Zionist mobs also beat people with wooden batons. It's all on video. And
yes, and planks and planks, a wooden plank also.
Yeah, and again, you wouldn't know this from watching corporate media. Like the best they can do there is clashes on both sides,
Right.
When the violence was really going one way and one way only.
Right. Sure. Yeah. And also, another thing that to point out is that it's interesting when she talks about what Biden's doing, she implicitly is like justifying what he's doing when she says that he's striking a balance between those two things, between defending free speech and however she presented it. But just an example, like subtly endorsing what Biden's doing. All right, back to the clip.
I am thinking back, and other people are making this reference, that this may be Biden's Vietnam. I worry very much that President Biden is putting himself in a position where he has alienated not just young people, but a lot of the Democratic base in terms of his views on Israel and this war.
Now, Republicans have tried to use...
Now, that is, I know, like someone just wrote, I'm disappointed in Bernie. Like moral issues, moral questions aside, that's very significant just politically, because Bernie really does not like to his, I think, detriment, does not like to criticize Biden and spends most of his time trying to get progressives to support what Biden did. So this is kind of a departure.
Use the protests as a political weapon, including former President Trump, who is back on the campaign trail in Michigan and Wisconsin this week for the first time since his criminal trial began nearly 2 weeks ago.
To every college president, I say remove the encampments immediately, vanquish the radicals, and take back our campuses for all of the normal students who want a safe place from which to learn.
Mr. Trump falsely insisted.
This is a guy who encouraged January 6th, talking about taking back our country. So he seems to have inconsistent standards when it comes to, mass protests and people force, whatever you want to call it, trespassing or, in the case of a campus protest, it's not actually comparable because they're not trespassing, it's their campus. But the point is, Trump seems to be selectively using his support for mass protests. And of course, he's trying to outflank Biden from the right because it's Israel. And Republicans, for all the talk about, supporting free speech and being against, snowflake college students, they're the biggest snowflakes of all when it comes to Israel. Constantly crying about how, everyone's an anti-Semite who doesn't support Israel, who's opposing genocide. So, I mean, that's the alternative we have. We have Biden who's facilitating mass murder and cheering on crackdowns on free speech, and the Republicans who want all that just to be even more extreme.
Right. It's so depressing. It's so incredibly depressing. Yeah. And it's also, he's doing it because it's Israel, but also he likes to play the, he likes to be, tough, like many Republicans, tough on law and order.
Again, that he won the state of Wisconsin.
Sorry, tough on crime. Yeah.
He did not. And this week, he would not commit to accepting the 2024 election results. In an interview with Time, Mr. Trump also said he would consider pardoning every one of the more than 800 people who've been sentenced for their roles in the January 6th Capitol insurrection, many of whom have pleaded guilty. And he wouldn't rule out political violence if he loses. Quote, if we don't win, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of an election. This weekend, Republican donors and potential running mates gathered at a donor retreat at Mr. Trump's private club in Palm Beach. NBC News has obtained audio of the closed-door event where Mr. Trump railed against prosecutors and baselessly accused President Biden's administration of orchestrating the indictments against him, saying, quote, "These people are running a Gestapo administration, and it's the only thing they have." Meanwhile, earlier this week, Trump said the search for a running mate is still in its early stages.
Usually it's done right around the convention. So it's going to be done, and maybe it'll be done before you, because here we are in Wisconsin. We'll be making that decision, I think, closer to Wisconsin time, if you want to know the truth. It's very early right now.
Wisconsin time. All right.
Well, they love them some Trump news. And again, Trump railing about the cases against him while cheering on the persecution of college students says everything you need to know about him.
Maybe he'd pardon them too. Maybe he just likes locking people up, then pardoning them, or he likes to see them locked up. He didn't lock those guys up from January 6th, obviously.
Okay, well, let's go to Cindy McCain, aforementioned Cindy McCain, head of the World Food Program, widow of Senator John McCain. And as we just heard, Cindy McCain is saying there's already a full-blown famine in northern Gaza. She had previously warned there was the risk of that. Now she's saying there is that. And this is how she put it to Meet the Press.
The World Food Program, you have provided aid to 1.4 million people every month since the start of the war, but the war is nearly in its 7th month. How dire is the humanitarian crisis on the ground right now in Gaza?
Well, whenever you have conflict like this and emotions rage high and things happen in a war, famine happens. And so what I can explain to you is...
Not sure every war... That's actually not an inevitable part of war, famine.
Yeah, she's saying whenever
an inflicted famine.
Yeah, she's saying when emotions run high, you have famine.
Yeah.
No, that's not really how it works. You have famine when a genocidal government says it's going to deny food and water to 2 million people and then enacts the policy with U.S. support. That's how you have a famine, not when emotions run high in a war. She's trying to pretend it's some sort of natural phenomenon that we have a famine right now. I mean, so good for her for acknowledging what other people have a hard time acknowledging, that which is we're causing famine, that a famine's happening. But she's also completely hiding the causality, which is that Israel with U.S. backing is causing it.
Right. And we keep seeing this, like with members of the U.S. government, they kind of will pay lip service to how bad something is, how more aid needs to get in, how there's not enough aid, but they never point the finger at why this is happening. And it does sound like the way they present it is it's just an inevitability of war, consequence of war, or even making it sound like a natural disaster as opposed to a very intentional policy decision.
Is that there is famine, full-blown famine in the north, and it's moving its way south. And so with what we're...
And someone just pointed out in the comments, is there famine in Ukraine? No.
Well, I guess emotions aren't high enough in Ukraine. That must be the lesson. Yes,
right.
The emotions are too damn high in Gaza, right?
Yeah.
Like the rent's too damn high, their emotions are too damn high, and that's why we have famine, according to Cindy McCain.
Right.
We have to work on those emotions. It's I mean, again, like
it's all emotional regulation.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that the head of the World Food Program is acknowledging that there's full-blown famine in northern Gaza. You know, she could be someone, given that she comes from the U.S. establishment, who would be hiding. But the way she's now trying to minimize it is really, it's really sadistic.
Yeah,
and it's just wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough of Cindy McCain. But
well, does she say anything? That's the relevant part, is that there is famine right now.
Exactly.
No longer risk,
and that she's trying to minimize it. The culprit.
Right.
Okay. Well, we have now.
Oh, this is a good one. Let's go over to, we're going to look at some ways that different networks are summarizing and presenting these protests. So let's take a look at how Fox News talks about what's going on at these protests.
That's right, Shannon. After days of silence about the protests, President Biden addressed the nation from here at the White House. Protests that are expected to continue throughout the summer and into the Democratic National Convention.
Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is.
Biden spoke hours after violence erupted on the campus of UCLA.
Again, it's violence erupted. Notice how they use these kind of these ways to language that obfuscates who's doing the violence, right? They never say it's the Zionists or the police. Just erupted.
Just like everywhere else, there was an encampment on campus at UCLA. It was peaceful.
Right.
They, were there for many days. I visited it. It was really, really nice.
Aaron was one of the outside agitators who responsible for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you call it that. Yeah. And then some, Zionist hooligans raised a lot of money. They set up like a giant speaker and a screen to basically harass the encampment. They got a lot of money. Like, for example, people like the wife of Jerry Seinfeld donated $5,000 to the counter protesters, to the pro-Zionist mob. And they attacked people literally with fireworks. Someone launched fireworks into the crowd. This horrifying video. Then they beat people as well. And some people at that encampment defended it because there was no campus security or police around to defend them. They just checked out. And then finally they were forcibly cleared in a police raid where the police fired rubber bullets at these protesters. Rubber bullets, which are bullets because they can do serious
break people's
damage.
arms. Yeah, they can blow off people's arms. Yeah, we should also mention that at Columbia, a police officer's gun went off. A shot was fired.
That's right. They fired a gun in the raid on Hamilton Hall, or Hind Hall, as the protesters.
Hind Hall, right? Yeah.
Members of the president's own party have criticized his handling of the Israel-Hamas war and the protests across the United States.
Notice, of course, Israel-Hamas war, right, as opposed to Israel's war on Palestine.
Democrat Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American in Congress, slammed the police response.
Sending in militarized police forces and even snipers to stop these students for exercising their First Amendment right is truly disgusting.
Another important thing, there was a sniper at Indiana University, and the university denied it. They lied about it, but they were, in fact, there. And there's photos of that.
Bizarre scene at the University of Alabama, where both pro- and anti-Israel protesters chanted the same thing.
Well, there's that unity we need in this country. F. Joe Biden from both sides.
That's Biden bringing the country together.
Exactly.
To say F him, yes.
During the 2020 presidential campaign, as protests also raged across the country, Biden pledged to bring people together.
I'm going to bring all these interests together. Peaceful protesters, police chiefs, police officers.
5 blocks from the White House at George Washington University, the statue of the first president remains defaced. After a giant American flag was unfurled, protesters superimposed the...
I don't know if that's defaced. He's dressed up. Here. He's wearing a keffiyeh and a Palestinian flag.
Yeah, no, he looks better. That's a better look.
He does, yeah. Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
For George Washington.
The statue of the first president remains defaced. After a giant American flag was unfurled, protesters superimposed this image with the words, Genocide Joe. Biden's former press secretary Jen Psaki will give the commencement address in 2 weeks. Republican lawmakers visited GW, including Byron Donalds.
Everybody believes in peaceful protests, but this is trespassing now.
Critics say the protests have cost Biden support among young voters.
Mr. President, have the protests forced you to reconsider any of the policies with regard to the region?
No. Thank you.
Mr. President.
That's good.
Right now, President Biden's CIA Director Bill Burns is in Cairo as hostage and ceasefire negotiations continue. Shannon?
All right, Lucas Tomlinson at the White House for us. Lucas, thank you.
So there's Fox News whitewashing what's happening. And now let's take a look at how it's represented at this week.
Growing tension over pro-Palestinian activism, including some vile displays of anti-Semitism, vandalism, and intimidation.
What are you talking about? some vile display. Like this is supposed to be like a news anchor, a dispassionate, objective news anchor.
Yeah.
He just says outright there are vile displays of anti-Semitism. What is he talking about? Are we going to get any examples of this?
Right.
Supposed vile anti-Semitism. It's just straight up stenography for Israel. That's just all it is. Okay, well, let's watch.
To police intervention at numerous universities. I'll speak with New York City.
A police intervention.
Police intervention, yeah.
yeah.
It's a nice way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah.
And
you
it
need
is
an intervention.
You need That's what this show is, actually. Yeah. Imagine if he just said like vile Islamophobia without showing any evidence of that. Imagine the outcry that would cause.
Well, that would be true because there was
exactly. It would be true, but it would also upset people. You know,
of course.
I guess my point is like you're not allowed to say that.
Yes. No, you're certainly not.
Mayor Eric Adams about that. But first, the very latest on the campus unrest from Stephanie Ramos.
Pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses stretching to nearly every corner of the country this week. Let's go! Bye-bye. Protesters briefly interrupting the University of Michigan's commencement ceremony yesterday, as dozens of police officers also cleared protesters at the University of Virginia. Nationwide, more than 2,400 people arrested as some protests descended into chaos. At Portland State University,
Portland police, leave the building now! Force will be used against you!
Police cleared an encampment that was twice established inside the university's library. At UCLA, an intense scene.
Wow, they show the fireworks. That's cool, right? But they don't mention who set them off.
Yeah, the way it's shown there, it's like, woo, we're celebrating. Yeah. Maybe we're celebrating like peaceful coexistence because Biden's brought us all together, you know? Not, look, these pro-genocide Zionist mobs have attacked people with fireworks.
Right.
In one night, at least, I think 25 people from the pro-Palestinian encampment were hospitalized at UCLA alone. No mention of that whatsoever. It's like the violence is totally normalized if the victims are Palestinians and their supporters.
Yeah, of course.
After the university called in city police, more than 200 arrested there as officers forced protesters out of an encampment, some defiant, telling our KABC the protests aren't over.
We're not done. We're not done. We're not going to leave this at that. We're not going to let people forget what happened.
And in New York City, police raiding this academic building at Columbia University that protesters broke into and took over. Hamilton Hall, known for student takeovers over the last several decades. Officials claimed the protests there and at nearby City College had been co-opted by outside agitators, saying nearly half of the 282 people arrested were not affiliated with the schools. Columbia's president defended the decision to call in the police to clear that building.
It was a violent act that put our students at risk, as well as putting the protesters at risk.
Yeah, you put the students at risk and the protesters at risk by calling in the NYPD in the first place. Even when the NYPD said that they did not see a clear and present danger. Imagine being more coppish than the NYPD.
Many protesters are calling on universities to divest from companies that do business with Israel. The campus turmoil sparked by the war in Gaza, now front and center for the 2024 campaign. Former President Trump applauded steps taken by the NYPD at Columbia.
The police came in exactly 2 hours. Everything was over. It was a beautiful thing to watch. New York's finest.
Beautiful.
President Biden speaking on the issue Thursday.
Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations.
The cancellation of classes. You know what that reminds me of? Not having sufficient schooling kind of reminds me of the fact that in Gaza there are no more universities left. He must be really upset about that as someone so committed to learning.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
Biden also condemned.
Actually, that is peaceful, except for the one thing that isn't. And I think there's a difference between violence against people versus violence against buildings. That's vandalism, not violence.
Yeah.
But yeah, a window. But that is guess what? Making a class later is not violence. It's violence against class scheduling. Who will speak for the class scheduling? Joe Biden.
Anti-Semitism and threats of violence against Jewish.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
Biden also condemning anti-Semitism and threats of violence against Jewish students.
There is
again non-existent. No one has been threatened with violence because they're Jewish.
no
Yeah,
place.
the only people threatening and carrying out violence were pro-Israel supporters who actually did that in multiple places, especially at UCLA, but in multiple places.
Yeah.
We've all seen the videos of this. Like, I mean, again, missing so far is any example of the supposed vile anti-Semitism that the anchor Jonathan Karl promised claimed happened in the intro to this video.
Right.
So far, it's only violence against Palestinians and their supporters, minus the windows that were broken in Hamilton Hall. If you want to call that violence, okay, let's be generous. That's violence. But aside from that, they can't point to anything because there was none.
Right. And the one woman who claimed that she was attacked, stabbed in the eye because she's Jewish, we debunked that a couple weeks ago. But that was clearly an accidental thing with the small Palestinian flag.
Yeah, a flag came near her face and she claimed she was stabbed in the eye.
Right. And she somehow was able to do media right after, and there was no evidence of the stabbing on her face or on her eye. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there were some videos of some people like draped in keffiyehs, like promising more October 7th.
Right.
But that video, they were so obviously just Zionists pretending to be Palestinians and their supporters.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like the guys were saying, never forget the 7th of October, you know, which was it anyway. So it's such a desperate attempt to smear people who are out there protesting actual violence and actual mass murder.
For hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. It's simply wrong.
For this week, Stephanie Ramos.
There he is, at least acknowledging the other.
Yeah, but he's in the process. He's drawing a fake parody because the only actual violence has been that against Palestinians and their supporters.
Exactly.
You know, in Vermont, for example, those 3 young college students who were shot. In Chicago, that young boy who was stabbed to death by a neighbor,
whose mother was also stabbed but survived. Yeah.
So anyway, not a single example of the supposed vile anti-Semitism that Jonathan Karl introed this video with. Not one. Okay, well, someone who is a hero to the people who love crackdowns on anti-genocide protesters is New York City Mayor Eric Adams. And he spoke to ABC.
Mayor Eric Adams joins us now. Mayor Adams, as I understand it now, 2 of the city's universities have now have authorized the NYPD to come in and help clearing campus on their campuses. We see NYU and the New School. What is the very latest in New York right now?
And several of our colleges ask the same. And we want to ensure we protect democracy and the right to protest. But we have an obligation that when those protests reach the point of violence, as the president stated, we have to ensure that we use a minimum amount of force to terminate what is perceived to be a threat, not only by our intelligence, but also the school and college officials.
And there you have an example of a disgusting complicity between the police and school administrations, where you'd like to think that school administrations would be more protective of their students than the former cop mayor of New York, but that's not the case at all.
And you had said that you had been saying for days, if not weeks, that there were outside agitators that were they were doing this stuff or provoking a lot of the stuff we've seen on the campuses. So particularly at Columbia,
So know what he does there. He doesn't ask him for evidence of outside agitators, right? He just grants him that he takes it for granted that it's true. And we'll see why that's very ironic in another clip. And watch how he uses that as a premise for the next leading question.
NYPD have gone in earlier in your view?
So it's not whether or not the NYPD should have gone in at all, right? The only question is, should they have gone in earlier?
Should the NYPD have gone in earlier, in your view? Is that the suggestion?
That determination, we communicated with the college officials for several days leading up to the New York City Police Department action. And we knew we had to get permission unless there's imminent threat.
Jonathan Carl's like, should we have like rounded up these young students and kicked them out of their student housing and taken away their school meals earlier? Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Please say yes.
Deported them?
Yeah, please say yes. Please say yes, because that's all I want. And as a member of the elite, like they hate the sight of these young people who are, not just protesting Israel, which all of them coalesce around defending. They also just like the very act of people sacrificing themselves, putting themselves on the line for a moral cause. It's completely antithetical to everything that elite journalists represent, when their job is to like serve power, launder their lies, accept the crumbs that they're given, or not crumbs, actually, the sizable sums they're given to be basically a spokesperson for the elite. And they hate to see, especially these elite schools like Columbia, where you're supposed to be a good student by, if you want to join the political media class, when you go to these schools, you're supposed to basically buy into the system where you're going to become a part of it and not challenge it. And they hate seeing people at these elite schools doing the exact opposite, saying, we don't want the trappings of privilege, of power. We actually want to take a stand for a moral cause. And so they're outraged. And so they want to see crackdowns everywhere, especially at the elite schools.
They also, there's a narrative that they like to pretend it's just at the elite schools, and they ignore the fact that it's at CUNY and Humboldt, California.
Yeah, Humboldt was like among the most hardcore encampments.
Yeah.
They basically took over. They basically took over a campus for a long stretch, and they also face repression. It's true.
Yeah.
Those schools do get ignored, because another thing of being like an elite journalist is you don't want to recognize the plebes, and you only care about what's happening in the elite circles because that's the crowd that you're in.
Right. And then also liberals get to pretend to be like, sensitive to class and point out this is a bourgeois elite thing. The working class masses, they don't care about this issue. Very dangerous and untrue argument.
Yes, as opposed to all the working class people who just like want all their tax dollars to go to Israel,
right,
and to arm Israel as it commits mass murder against Palestinian kids. That's a huge working class issue priority.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lie. It's just a gross thing to watch people attempt to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like pseudo populists are doing that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To life or severe threat to property. And once the schools made the determination, we shared the information that we had. Our intelligence division looked at it, and it was concerning to me, but we were not going to overstep our legal authority and right to do so.
So he's like putting it on the administration.
Yeah, and he's given the biggest softball in the world. Like, should you have raided these kids
sooner.
earlier? And which allows him to sort of look as if he was being sober and rational. By the way, the NYPD, I'm sure people saw this, but in case you missed it, put out like a really heavily produced video of their control room on the night of the raid, where it's like they're carrying out the Bin Laden raid. Like they're like overseeing some sophisticated operation to take out terrorists, and there's music. It was like heavily produced to make it look as if these were heroes from their command post raiding unarmed young students sleeping in tents on a college campus.
Yeah, so disgusting.
We have more Eric Adams, I think, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we got to show this one. So this is, remember, by the way, John Carl's question to him, where it's like, should have been earlier? Should the cops have been called in when you did or earlier? Reminds me of when Colbert had the Colbert Report. He used to do this thing where he was like, George W. Bush, best president or best president ever?
Mm-hmm.
Similar, same energy, same range of opinion. Let's take a look at what Eric Adams exposed. He had a real smoking gun. Let's see what he had.
But we've heard from your team that there are these nameless leaders who were involved. Can you tell us who they were?
Sorry, this isn't the smoking gun one. Yeah, it could count as a smoking gun. But here's the outside agitator proof. Ready?
Or at least how many of them there are.
Well, first, I always suspected that something was happening, and I'm happy that the confirmation of my suspicion turned out to be accurate when our intelligence division briefed me on two particular individuals. One of them, husband, was arrested for terrorism. As well, some of the paraphernalia and pamphlets that we saw, individuals we saw who were not CUNY students, were there training individuals. We saw the...
Okay, so this is part of his attempt to paint the Columbia protests as being the result of outside agitators.
And terrorist sympathizers, terrorist wives.
So his first example of a supposed outside agitator, as he says, is the wife of someone arrested for terrorism. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the wife of Sami al-Arian, who visited the campus protests for like 20 minutes last week. She's 63 years old. She's a retired teacher. She's the mother of a family of journalists, and she was with her two daughters, both of whom are journalists. And that's who he's painting as being an outside agitator. And her husband, Sami al-Arian, he was charged under a ridiculous Patriot Act era case of financing groups in Palestine that were illegal, when really he was raising money for charity. And what he leaves out, and what the entire media left out, is that the jury in Sami al-Arian's case failed to return a single guilty verdict against him. They acquitted him on most of the counts. They deadlocked on others, but he was never convicted by a jury of anything. Then, rather than accept their loss, prosecutors who were so determined to get him basically threatened to refile the case, put him and his family through another ordeal. And at that point, to avoid putting his family through all this again, he accepted a plea deal of a sentence in prison and then deportation, just to spare his family. And that wasn't good enough for prosecutors, who then managed to imprison him for longer by forcing him to testify in a grand jury case that was totally unrelated. So his family's been through hell, persecuted by the state, smeared in the media. And because his wife, who's now in the U.S. because she has grandchildren here, visited Columbia for about 20 minutes, like last,
had some hummus with her daughters and with some kids on the campus. Yeah.
This is Eric Adams, evidence for outside infiltration. It's just such a sick joke.
So gross. And that's his evidence.
Escalation of the tactics that were...
And by the way, the media totally went along with it. So this was a talking point from his office. They fed this to people in the media, and all of them repeated it. It was on CNN. Nobody or at least I didn't see anybody report the actual facts, that they were smearing a 63-year-old woman and her family.
Yeah, it was reported on CNN, and the CBS journalist tweeted it out and then deleted it. But it just shows you how in cahoots these people are.
And if anyone's interested in the story, there's a documentary about it. It's called USA versus al-Arian. It's available online, and I recommend it. And because what that family went through was so shameful. And now, here is Eric Adams, helped by the media, reviving that witch hunt against Sami al-Arian to advance their narrative aimed at demonizing the protesters.
Yeah,
it's the what's happening here is the very dehumanization of Palestinians that these protesters are standing up against.
Yeah.
Okay. We have more Eric Adams though from Sunday.
Yeah. But again, this had already happened, right? This clip that we just saw, where he has no evidence and an incorrect piece of evidence about a terrorist sympathizer who was not there in Columbia. And yet John Carl, in that clip we just saw, was happy asking him about the outside agitators as if it was a fact and not a lie. Okay, now back to the John Carl interview with Eric Adams.
Obligation We have an obligation that when those protests reach the point of violence, as the president stated, we have to ensure that we use a minimum amount of force to terminate what is perceived to be a threat, not only by our intelligence, but also the school and college officials. And I have an obligation and responsibility to ensure the city is safe. I policed in the city during 9/11, and there was one of the flyers that was found inside the protest. And if you look closely, it says, "Death to America." This has left the point of advocating for a particular item. And as I say over and over again, there's a real attempt to radicalize our young people. And when you look at some of the information and some of the people who were there, we need to be clear that we cannot take this lightly. And when I use the term of outside agitators, anyone can protest in the city. But when you're on college grounds and you do not attend that college, you are an outsider. And then when you train people to do destructive things, you are an agitator. And so I'm not trying to be politically correct. I'm trying to be correct for the city of New York as we make sure the city continues to be safe. But we have an obligation.
So because they found a flyer allegedly that said "Death to America" on it, that justifies a crackdown. Even though, I mean, that's called free speech. You're allowed to have a flyer.
You may not
that
like
says
that idea, but that's not violence.
Very enlightening. Very enlightening. Okay, well, we have so many. We have a parade of politicians coming out to cheer on the campus crackdown. None other, of course, none more probably enthusiastic about cracking down on college kids than Senator Tom Cotton.
Senate, it was a majority, solid majority that supported this, but 15 Republican senators voted no. And I was struck by what Senator Mike Lee, a Republican colleague in the Senate, said about Ukraine funding, Taiwan, Israel, that whole package. He said it was unadulterated capitulation to vote for that bill, and that it was a bill that was a warmonger wish list. A warmonger wish list pushed through by Speaker Johnson. I mean, are we seeing a return, at least in some quarters, to kind of an isolationist Republican Party?
No, I think what you see among a lot of Republicans, they have legitimate and reasonable concerns about our defense industrial base's ability to support our own military, much less other countries' wars. I share those concerns. Now, I think the way to do that is to invest more in that defense industrial base, but that's largely a practical difference about circumstances here in our defense industrial base. The Democrats, though, they have deep philosophical divisions on Israel. That's why you see all these little Gazas out there on campuses where you have people chanting vile anti-Semitic rhetoric. That is not...
Again, claim of vile anti-Semitic rhetoric. I just want to point out that Tom Cotton, a very right-wing Republican, and John Karl are making the same baseless argument. John Karl, allegedly a reporter.
Yeah, and look, imagine if someone called New York City, a pro-Israel protest in New York City, a little Tel Aviv, or people like Tom Cotton will call that anti-Semitic. He's saying all these protests are little Gazas, which he's trying to suggest something about, these little encampments as being little Gazas and all the sort of Islamophobic connotations of that in the eyes of people like him. And that's allowed to pass.
Well, and I mean, Karl does actually call him out on that, but he just the fact that he says that.
Not something that's going to go away.
Well, let me ask you about that. We saw President Biden come out. I mean, I'm sure you think it was too late, but he did come out and he clearly condemned the violence. He's condemned the anti-Semitism. I assume you agree with what he did, even if it was too late.
So no, I think you're mischaracterizing what he did. Yes, it was absolutely too late. It was 2 weeks after these pro-Hamas fanatics had taken over a lot of campuses and set up these little Gazas. Second, he didn't specifically speak to what they're saying and what they're doing. They're chanting final solution or telling...
Not at all. They're not chanting final solution.
Yeah, he's just, he's just completely lying through his teeth. No one's chanting any of that. No one even there is showing support for Hamas. And if these were little Gazas, as he alleges, they wouldn't exist because they'd be bombed to smithereens and there wouldn't be any food or water. and
which is what he wants.
Yeah.
Jews to go back to where they came from. They're spray painting buildings with vile anti-Semitic hate. He said, well, we shouldn't have anti-Semitism or hate speech in the abstract or Islamophobia. Where are the encampments, John, on campuses spreading Islamophobia? Why is
It's so funny. He's offended by Biden even paying lip service to the other side, like to Islamophobia. And of course, there is Islamophobia that we're seeing in the responses to the encampments. And there's Islamophobia in the genocide against Palestinians, in case he's looking for it.
Okay, I think that's enough of this guy. He's, speaking of vile, he's just impossible to listen to. He's so full of hate. He's so full of hate.
Yeah.
And here's someone else, though, speaking out. Tim Scott, a Republican senator. He's in the running for Trump's VP nomination. And this is the approach that he took.
Have to understand is the anti-Semitism that we're seeing on college campuses today is akin to what we saw in the 1960s. What we should be saying as a nation, the American people, they're saying it loud and clear. They support eliminating anti-Semitism from college campuses. They're being very clear. There's no space for hate in America. What's not clear is why it took so long for President Biden to come to a microphone and condemn anti-Semitism.
First of all, it didn't take Biden long at all to falsely accuse the protesters of anti-Semitism. He did that from the start.
Right.
He will, that's been their playbook all along. So Tim Scott's like, in his attempted criticism on fake grounds, is lying. But also, again, he says that this is akin to what we saw on college campuses in the 1960s. So what is he talking about? What is he talking about? Is he saying, like, but is he comparing the protesters to, for example, like Jim Crow?
Right.
It's saying that like they're like the modern day embodiment of Jim Crow, or is he saying that? Or are you talking about 1960s in terms of Vietnam protests?
Right.
But if so, like that's pretty recognized now. I mean, I guess if you're a reactionary senator, that's a bad thing. But
but for these people,
it's a good thing to oppose mass murder in the 60s was a good thing, as it is now.
Right.
So it's pretty unclear. It's unclear what he's talking about there.
It's also fun. Yeah, and also the protesters in the 60s. I mean, you had some white racist protests, but in general, the protests were pro civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for making that parallel.
Yeah. Okay. Marco Rubio also had thoughts.
And notice, by the way, that it's like there's a talking point that went out: vile anti-Semitism. We keep hearing that adjective. Okay.
GOP Senator Marco Rubio, ranking member of the Senate Intel Committee. Welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start there. It sounds like this hostage negotiation deal is falling apart. Secretary Blinken said Hamas just needs to say yes. And not only does it not sound like they're saying yes, they've got this shelling this morning at an aid crossing that is going to shut it down. You have been there in recent days with the Prime Minister. They say they're moving in on Rafah. Where do we go from here?
Well, it's their war, and they have a right to fight it. These are degenerate savages, Hamas. I mean, just think about the report that I just heard a second ago, okay? Everybody's saying, send in humanitarian aid. These poor people are starving. Well, that's what they tried to do, and these guys are launching mortar attacks against the humanitarian aid that's coming in. You know that a lot of the humanitarian aid that's getting in, and Israel's allowing it in anyways because they know they need to do it, but Hamas, this stuff's being sold in the marketplace. This administration, this is Israel's war. We should basically say we are on the side of the people who were the victims on October 7th of a bunch of savages and lunatics who came across that border and massacred and killed and kidnapped and raped and took hostages back with them. These people need to be defeated. How is Israel supposed to coexist, to live side by side, alongside, next to these people? And when they talk about displacement,
I mean, to add to the latter question, it's pretty simple. Stop occupying and besieging them, as has been done for decades, and stop holding yourself up as a superior people. That's what Israel's founded on, is supremacy. I mean, there's so many lies in that little clip. It's impossible to correct all of them in the time we have. But he says that Hamas has attacked aid deliveries when it's the exact opposite. Israel, after blocking aid deliveries deliberately, as they openly stated, they couldn't have made it more clear that we're going to cut off food and water to 2 million plus people. then finally, a few of the aid convoys they have led through, there are all these flower massacres where they open fire on people trying to get aid, starving people. So he has it completely in reverse, among several other lies in that little clip.
Right. Yeah, I mean, also they're making it seem like they did that on purpose. They targeted the crossing, and that's not what happened. They fired at Israeli troops. Forces.
And in this clip, Rubio goes on to say that we should deport foreign students who have taken part in these protests. I guess let's try to get through it.
People, there are 80,000 Israelis right now that are displaced from the north. They have to live. I saw them. They are living in hotels. Their kids are going to school.
Oh my God!
Israelis have been living in hotels.
Living in hotels. Their kids are being educated on Zoom for now. Who will speak out for these people? Where are the people of Gaza living? Do they have hotels?
There are over 1 million people, well over 1 million people in Gaza who have been displaced. Now Israel's forcing them to flee again because it's attacking Rafah and ordered people to evacuate and evacuate to where they have nowhere to go because they're inside a death camp. And 80,000 Israelis in the north have to live in hotels or with relatives, and Marco Rubio can only find sympathy for them.
It's so disgusting.
Line in conference rooms at hotels. They can't go north because Hezbollah is attacking them in northern Israel. So this is a time where we need to have not a weak and feeble president, but someone who makes it very clear that we are on Israel's side. They are the good guys in this fight, and Hamas are the evil ones. And these terrible civilian casualties that are happening is because Hamas is using them as human shields.
Okay, so lie, talking point, the human shield lie, but also Biden called Hamas unmitigated, unadulterated evil. Does he really think that he hasn't made it clear enough that he thinks that they're evil? He's making it sound like Biden is some like peacenik who is criticizing Israel, which he's absolutely not.
Well, and I think that a lot of people, as we watch these campus protests and demonstrations spread, would agree that nobody wants civilians to be killed in this process. But in many of those cases, clearly they have crossed the line to actually threatening fellow students, those kinds of things. We're hearing now from some international students who are speaking.
Where?
What is she talking about? What is she talking about?
Yeah.
Speaking up, saying they worry that because they may be suspended or disciplined, it could cost them their student visa to be here in the U.S. Do you think that's going too far? Or do you think that's an appropriate response?
I think Joe Biden, he hasn't done it again because he's weak and he's feeble. But Joe Biden, very early on, should have said, as I asked him to do back in October, if you're in the streets of the United States, you're here as a visitor on a visa. Okay, you're not an American. You're here on a visa, and you're here to teach, or you're here to go to school, and you're out there chanting on behalf of Hamas and Hezbollah and these terrorist groups, who, by the way, also hate America. We should revoke your visa. If you are here in this country as a visitor on a visa and you are defacing statues of George Washington, ripping down American flags, putting up Palestinian flags, you should have your visa revoked and eliminated. And he should have been very clear about whose side we're on from the very beginning. But there's a bunch of Democratic donors, major Democratic donors, who are behind the groups that are funding all this. I saw the other day, I think it was in UCLA, there's thousands of dollars of plywood that they were using as barricades against the police. They're committing acts of violence, not just acts.
Oh my God! I mean, first of all,
plywood.
They've accused like George Soros of funding all of this, which is funny. Like they claim to fight anti-Semitism, but they're accusing a Jewish billionaire of being the hidden hand behind all these protests.
Right? Who's like a famous trope, anti-Semitic trope? Yeah, as a person. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, we tried to correct some of the lies. We couldn't get to all of them because Marco Rubio is just such a prolific liar. But that's, I mean, this is the face of Israel and its defenders, just lie after a lie. Okay,
and then again, it's just so disgusting that he has empathy for people having to stay in hotels. Like, can you imagine how thrilled people in Gaza would be if they had hotels to stay in?
But again, he doesn't. He just illustrates that the elite class of the U.S. doesn't see Palestinians as equal human beings. So therefore, their plight, their suffering, exponentially worse than some displaced Israelis in the north. It just can't even be acknowledged. It doesn't exist in their minds.
And I like the way he calls them savages, by the way. Hamas.
Sure.
Nice racist phrasing. Yeah.
We're going to skip ahead to Ro Khanna. who has been critical of Joe Biden somewhat, but still campaigning for his reelection. So he has been sort of trying to play both sides here. And he spoke to Face the Nation about the protests.
While you were talking about very specific policy changes for very specific allegations, you also see at some of these protests things that are mixed in there, either outside agitators or extreme rhetoric. Your Democratic colleague, Alyssa Slotkin, was just tweeting about this protest at GW University. She said there were individuals shouting guillotine, guillotine, and having a mock trial of school administrators. She says that creates a climate of fear for Jewish students. What's being lost here in the conversation?
Why for Jewish students, by the way?
Specific allegations.
Why is that scary for Jewish students if they're doing this towards college administrations who they think are cracking down on their rights?
Guillotine and having a mock trial of being lost here.
Right. I mean, you can't be shouting guillotine, guillotine. You can't be shouting globalize the intifada or Zionists don't deserve to live. What's being lost is that those few protests.
First of all, you can shout globalize the intifada.
Right.
Intifada means shaking off or uprising. So you do have the right to say that. And yes, one student on like a Zoom call said Zionists don't deserve to live, which he then apologized for.
And he got kicked out of school for it.
He was, and then like Israel supporters have made that the refrain. They keep referring to this one kid who said that on a Zoom call. Or on social media or something.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah.
Anyway, he wasn't even on campus when he said, or he wasn't even at the protest when he said it.
Right.
But they've made that into like, okay, so one kid said one thing, and then that's grounds to like, basically
smear all of the protests.
Yeah.
Protesters who are inciting violence or engaging in that kind of anti-Semitism are diminishing the thousands of young people who simply want the war to end. And I guess I would say, look to John Lewis or Dr. King. They, in their protests, were above reproach. If some individual engaged in bigotry, they call them out first and loudly. So I'm proud of a lot of the young people who want to end the war, but they need to show the discipline. And some universities have. Look at Cornell, look at universities.
I'm proud of the young people. I'm just going to throw them under the bus for my own political career. I think that's what Ro Khan is saying there. Okay. Thank you, Ro, for nothing. He is, Ro can sometimes say some sensible things, but then he always likes to cater to the establishment. And anyway, let's go on to Mitch Landrieu. He's the co-chair of Biden's campaign. And Jake Tapper, one of our favorite journalists.
The best.
Yeah, pretty much openly acting as a stenographer for Israel. He interviewed him about the protests.
Discuss co-chair of the Biden-Harris re-election campaign, former New Orleans mayor and White House official Mitch Landrieu. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us. President Biden condemned the escalating unrest on college campuses this week. He called this a moment for clarity. But even after the Orthodox rabbi at Columbia told Jewish students to leave campus because it wasn't safe for them, it still took a week and a half. I mean, that was 2 weeks ago that happened.
Okay. I don't know. It's so embarrassing that he's bringing this up. This was one Orthodox rabbi who said this, and Hillel said, no, don't leave campus. He tweeted, remember, like Jake Tapper tweeted this out, and he got appropriately dragged for it, and yet not dragged enough because he's bringing it up again.
Yeah, and the rabbi in question worked with fanatic settler groups in the occupied West Bank.
Right.
But yet, because he calls himself a rabbi, Jake Tapper just sees him as like, he's like
an authority.
Say no more. Yes.
Right.
This rabbi issued this warning. Why didn't the National Guard come in?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It still took a week and a half for President Biden to address the nation on this. And only then after pressure from Republicans and even some Democrats. Why? Why did it take so long? If this moment called for clarity, why was it so slow in coming?
Well, first of all, the First Amendment is critically important. The president has always believed that people ought to have the opportunity to redress their grievances against their government. This is not something new. It's been going on since the beginning of our time. You see different campuses handling this in a different way, and finally you see some campuses doing this better than others. The president has been very strong about this from the beginning. And the president came out the other day, and as he said, as he has always said, he understands that people have a right to protest, but they have to do so peacefully. But when it turns violent, that's when things have to end. You're going to have a university president on after you have me on, and they're going to continue to work through this. But the president's been very clear about this. He's also been very strong about the need to stamp out anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. It's a very difficult time, very passionate opinions on both sides of this issue. The president has been handling it, I think, very, very well, and he's going to continue to do so.
I've seen some pretty ugly anti-Semitic incidents right where you are at Tulane University in New Orleans. Months ago, I saw that. It was caught on video. Politico has a story out this morning.
What was it?
Noting that a lot of the multimillionaires and billionaires funding the most explicitly anti-Israel groups, ones that think Israel has no right to exist, that are active on campuses, that these groups are funded by big Biden donors, the Pritzker.
Okay, he's referring to a Politico story, and since the Politico story was published, they've issued a massive correction. I'm going to try to pull it up. It's so funny. It's basically saying that the premise for the entire story is fake. Here it is. And I wonder if Jake Tapper is going to update his viewers on this correction. Okay, look at this correction. First of all, just look at the size. It's a big boy. Look at that.
Wow.
Correction. An earlier version of this report misstated that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation seeds the Tide Foundation's work. Tide is this progressive philanthropic organization that funds a number of progressive causes. It no longer has active grants to Tides. It also said Politico contacted Gates. Politico contacted an agency that is represented the Gates Foundation, but did not reach out directly to Gates. And it said, if not now, is one of the two main organizations behind the protests. If not now, supporting protests, but students are leading them. So that's a whopper of a correction from Politico. Somehow I doubt that it's going to make it onto Jake Tapper's airwaves.
Of course, if we had a responsible media, that would be an article in itself that they printed that. An article about media malpractice.
Yeah. You can count on that not happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, we have limited time. So let's
some
skip
of these
ahead.
are going to be in this week's Thursday Throwdown because they're so good, some of them.
Yes, if you subscribe to our Thursday to Useful Idiots, that's usefulidiotspodcast.com. You get our Thursday Throwdown, which is your midweek dose of media madness, and we'll go over there some of what we missed in today's Monday morning. But one thing we're not going to miss as we wrap is this really interesting exchange between Margaret Brennan and Kristi Noem. Kristi Noem is in the running for VP on the Trump campaign. She's the governor of South Dakota. She recently made headlines because she admitted in her new book, her new memoir, that she killed a dog, her family dog, that she shot her dog to death because she said it was a threat to livestock on their farm or something, or I don't know. Anyway, but now she has a new controversy where in her book, which is just about to come out, well, you'll see it here she's asked about it by Margaret Brennan of Face the Nation.
You write about lessons learned in leadership, and you bring up some specific incidents I want to ask you about. You talk about meeting some world leaders, and one specific one, quote, "I remember when I met with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, I'm sure he underestimated me, having no clue about my experience staring down little tyrants. I've been a
like dogs.
Children's pastor after all." Did you meet Kim Jong-un?
Well, as soon as this was brought to my attention, I certainly made some changes and looked at this passage. And I've met with many, many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. As soon as it was brought to my attention, we went forward and have made some edits. So I'm glad that this book is being released in a couple of days, and that those edits will be in place, and that people will have the updated version.
So who wrote it then?
Great question.
Like, usually were you like drunk when you wrote it, or like on some mind altering drug?
You did not meet with Kim Jong-un. That's what you're saying.
I've met with many world leaders, I've traveled around the world. I think I've talked extensively in this book about my time serving in Congress, my time as governor, before governor, some of the travels that I've had. I'm not going to talk about my specific meetings with world leaders. I'm just not going to do that.
Why?
This anecdote shouldn't have been.
So she's bragging in her book about facing down Kim Jong-un. Then it's revealed that she actually didn't meet with Kim Jong-un. And now she says, I'm not going to talk about my meetings with world leaders. Rather than just say, no, I didn't meet with them and come up with an excuse for why, just like blame her ghostwriter. I think that would sound better than what she's doing here.
Right.
In the book, and as soon as it was brought to my attention, I made sure that was adjusted. So the book is not released until Tuesday, and so we're doing all that we can to make sure that those changes are made, and I'm going to continue to focus on what this book is and the blueprint that it lays out for the American citizen.
It sounds like the book is a fraud because it contains a demonstrable lie, and she does not want to focus on that at all.
Right.
All of the things in the background and stories of my life, but also what I think that needs to be identified in politics and what's broken today. I talk about how broken the money game is, how broken it is that we've got consultants that are getting rich off of elected officials, and then how fake some elected politicians are. Every single person in this country wants someone in elected office that's a human being, that doesn't say they're perfect. I take responsibility for that being in the book, and as soon as it was brought to my attention, I asked for it to be changed. So I'm glad that the release date is in a couple of days, and we're excited to talk to America about my new book, No Going Back.
So good pivot. Good message discipline.
Everybody wants someone who's a real person who will lie about meeting with Kim Jong-un and then not take responsibility for it when they get caught.
Yeah. And also kill dogs and brag about it.
Yeah. And then, so that awkward exchange produced this awkward interview, this awkward introduction for the next interview on Face the Nation with Senator John Fetterman.
To the show, Senator.
Hi.
Hi.
Great to be here.
Great to have you here. You're cracking up. Do you want to tell us what you're responding to there?
Oh, that interview, that was magnificent. No, I
so awkward.
Really awkward.
Yeah. And then John Fetterman, of course, goes on to denounce the campus protesters and apologize for Israeli genocide, because he really is Israel's main spokesperson in the U.S. right now.
And
John
he says
Fetterman.
that the aid should be totally should never be conditional. He would never support putting conditions on aid.
He wants unfettered military support for Israel.
John Unfetterman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
John Unfetterman. Okay. Well, that brings to an end this episode of Monday Morning.
But I just want to read some big super chats really quickly.
Okay.
That we didn't get to read. So we don't have time to read all of them. We always highlight them, but this one I want to read. Very generous from A. Deck. Sonoma State near Santa Rosa, California has joined the movement. Great to hear. Rain Burrows tells us that he loves us, or she loves us. They love us. And Jeff Sachs on Judging Freedom at 5:15 today. GP for peace.
Aaron Maté on Judging Freedom today as well.
Nice.
I forgot at what time, but yeah. I'll be on there at some point. Yeah.
Should be an interesting Dem convention in Chicago, August 19th. Proud of these students. Wadesworth, very generous donation. Thanks for that. And those are just some of this. Those are just some of the super chats. So do make sure that you, if you can, please do join the show, become Substack subscribers, and you get the access to extended interviews and Thursday Throwdown, which is where we do this basically, but about midweek media clips.
It's a crazy concept. What happens is we do this, but it's on Thursday instead of Monday. It's nuts.
Yeah.
It's really
not live.
Yeah. And it's not live either. Yeah. So if we make any mistakes, we can edit them out and you never see them. It's
like if we say on the show that we met with Kim Jong-un.
That's gone. Exactly.
That's gone. Yeah.
Which happens all the time.
All the time, yeah. All righty.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
We'll see you
everybody.
next